Listen closely because what you're about to hear is not the kind of advice that makes you feel hyped for a moment and empty an hour later. This is the kind that sneaks under your skin and stays there. You reach out. They pull back. You give space. They go cold. You try harder. They disappear entirely. And somewhere in that cycle, you stopped asking, what's wrong with them, and started asking, what's wrong with me? That question right there. That's where everything went sideways. Because here's what nobody tells you. The moment you turned the confusion inward, the avoidant didn't just win the dynamic. They became the center of gravity in the relationship. And you, without realizing it, handed them that position completely. So ask yourself this. Why does giving more always seem to create more distance? Why does the one person who claims they want connection keep running from it? Why does your emotional availability feel like a threat to them instead of a gift? And why, when you finally stop trying, do they suddenly reappear? By the end of this, you're going to understand the exact psychological architecture underneath avoidant behavior, not surface patterns, the deep mechanism. And more importantly, you're going to understand what happens internally, structurally, when you stop operating from need and start operating from power. The avoidant doesn't fall because you played games. They fall because you stopped being the one thing their entire defense system depends on. Here's the first reframe you need. You've been thinking about avoidant behavior as a communication style or an attachment wound. And while that's technically accurate, it's incomplete in a way that's been costing you everything. Avoidant behavior is a control architecture. It's not random withdrawal. It's a precision-built emotional system designed to maintain psychological dominance through unpredictability. Every time they pull back, they reset the power balance. Every time you lean in to close the gap, you confirm their internal narrative. I am the one who is chosen. I am the one who matters more. That's not a wound playing out. That's a pattern that works. And it works because you've been responding to it exactly the way it was built to make you respond. The intimacy they say they want is actually a threat to the identity they've constructed. Because their identity is built on emotional self-sufficiency, on not needing, on being the one who could walk away. The moment genuine closeness becomes real, it destabilizes that entire structure. So they create distance, not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much and have no architecture to hold it. Understanding this changes everything. Because now you're not dealing with someone who doesn't care. You're dealing with someone whose entire sense of self collapses under the weight of being truly seen. And that means the way you've been approaching this, with more warmth, more reassurance, more availability, has been feeding the very system you're trying to dismantle. Now here's how this plays out across 4 distinct phases when you understand this and begin to operate differently. The first phase is the dependency loop. This is where you currently are or have been. You're emotionally present. They're emotionally inconsistent. You're reading signals, adjusting behavior, trying to figure out what version of you they respond to best. In this phase, you are the variable. You are the one constantly recalibrating. They are static, predictable in their unpredictability. Internally, in this phase, they're experiencing something they would never admit. Comfort, not warmth, comfort. Because your pursuit confirms their superiority narrative. You don't break this phase by being better. You break it by stopping. The second phase is the silence disruption. This is what happens when you genuinely, not strategically, genuinely, withdraw your emotional labor. You stop initiating. You stop interpreting their coldness. You stop making space for their inconsistency by filling every gap with your anxiety. On the outside, nothing dramatic happens. But internally, for the avoidant, their entire feedback loop breaks. The mirror they were using to feel chosen goes dark. And the thing they were most defended against, needing someone, begins to surface. This phase feels uncomfortable for you. It will feel like you're losing. You're not. You're shifting gravity. The third phase is the internal fracture. The avoidant begins to feel the absence not as relief, which is what they expected, but as a gap they can't explain. Their defense system was designed to protect them from needing you. It was not designed to handle not being needed by you. This is the structural collapse that most people never get to see because they re-engage too soon. The avoidant becomes restless. Their thoughts return to you, not out of love initially, but out of disruption. Something in the narrative broke. Externally, you may see them reach out in indirect ways, testing, observing, Internally, they're experiencing something foreign, pursuit of someone they can't easily have. The fourth phase is the renegotiation. This is where the dynamic has the potential to become real or to reset into the old pattern. The avoidant, now operating from disruption rather than comfort, will attempt to re-establish contact. What determines whether this becomes genuine connection or another cycle is entirely dependent on who you've become in the interim. If you've spent that silence rebuilding your own internal architecture, your standards, your self-concept, your clarity, then the renegotiation happens on entirely different terms. If you've spent that silence just waiting for them to come back, you'll fall back into phase one within weeks. Here's what most people do versus what actually creates a shift. Most people, when faced with avoidant withdrawal, increase emotional output. They analyze the distance, they communicate their feelings, they become more understanding, more accommodating, more patient. The internal logic is, if I show them I'm safe, they'll open up. What actually happens is the opposite. Every act of emotional overextension signals low leverage. It confirms that the avoidant holds more value in the dynamic, and it trains them, unconsciously, to expect your emotional availability as a given, not as something earned. The people who actually shift the dynamic don't do it through tactics. They do it through a fundamental change in how they relate to their own worth. They stop positioning themselves as someone waiting to be chosen and start operating as someone who is actively choosing. They stop making the avoidance emotional unavailability a problem to solve and start treating it as information that tells them whether this person meets their standard. That identity shift from seeker to evaluator is the most disruptive thing you can do to an avoidance internal system, because their entire behavioral architecture assumes you need them more than they need you. The moment that assumption breaks, so does the architecture. 5 principles that restructure the dynamic at the behavioral level. The first is disappearing value. Stop being consistently available in the same way at the same times. Not as a game, as a reflection of a full life. When your presence becomes less predictable, your absence becomes meaningful. An avoidance nervous system is finely tuned to detect need. Inconsistency from you creates cognitive engagement they cannot control. The second is neutral observation. When they do reach out, respond from a place of calm, evaluation rather than relief. Your emotional tone in response to their contact tells them everything about your leverage. Relief communicates scarcity. Neutrality communicates options. The third is standard articulation. Know, and be willing to demonstrate what you will not accept, not as an ultimatum, as a boundary that comes from self-respect. Avoidance test standards constantly, not to violate them, but to assess whether they exist. When you enforce yours calmly and consistently, it registers as something they are not accustomed to, someone with genuine psychological ground to stand on. The fourth is redirected investment. Every unit of energy you are putting into understanding, accommodating, or analyzing the avoidant, redirect it into your work, your body, your other relationships, your development. This isn't distraction. This is the actual rebuilding of your own gravitational field. You become more interesting, more grounded, more self-contained. That is, magnetic in a way that no amount of emotional openness ever will be. The fifth is unattached clarity. Get clear on whether you actually want this person or whether you want the resolution of the discomfort they created in you. These are different things. One is a genuine choice. The other is a trauma response wearing a relationship's clothes. Clarity here isn't cold. It's the most powerful thing you can bring into any dynamic. Here's the deeper truth underneath all of this. This isn't about making an avoidant fall. That framing, as satisfying as it sounds, will keep you in a smaller version of yourself. Because any strategy you run from a place of wanting someone to fall is still a strategy built on needing something from them. And need, in any form, is leverage they can use. The actual transformation available to you here is the construction of an identity that doesn't require their emotional availability to feel whole. You don't react. You observe. You don't chase. You assess. You don't make yourself smaller to fit their comfort zone. You build something they would have to grow to enter. This is not detachment. This is not coldness. This is self-possession, the rarest and most genuinely attractive quality in any human being. When you stop needing the avoidant to behave differently in order for you to feel okay, something changes, not just in the dynamic, in you. You stop being someone who is managed by uncertainty and start being someone who moves through it with clarity. That shift is irreversible, and it is the only thing that creates genuine change in any relationship, not just with an avoidant, but with every dynamic in your life. Zoom all the way out. The relationship you have with an avoidant is, in its most honest form, a mirror. It shows you exactly where your self-worth has been externally dependent, exactly where you've been, waiting for permission, to feel secure, to feel chosen, to feel enough. The work here is not about them. It never was. It's about whether you're willing to become the kind of person who doesn't need the dynamic to resolve in order to know their own value. Because here is the final truth. An avoidant doesn't fall for someone who pursues them harder. They fall, if they fall at all, for someone who stopped needing them to. And the version of you that reaches that point, that version doesn't need them to fall. That version has already won.